Are you set?
Look at that.
Okay.
We're here.
All right, guys. Welcome back for today's live broadcast, or podcast for that matter.
Whatever the heck we're doing.
It's both.
Yeah. Yes, there's a bunch of us sitting in the studio.
We're
here
four-spotting it again.
Yeah. Round of introductions, of course. Dr.
Am I
Caroline,
going
as
first?
always.
Yeah,
yes,
I was going to say,
yes. Bree
I don't know that I need
Michigan
an
State, yes. And then, of course, Ben.
Well, you know, I'm
Ben.
always here.
Yeah.
I got to push the buttons.
Yeah,
That's true.
right. Yes, physically.
Yes.
But yeah, Bree, excited to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I was super thrilled. Yesterday was my first day, and I got to scrub into your GDV, and I was super stoked about that because I was like in complete business casual, like not prepared to be like in surgery, and I was like, hell yeah, I'll do it. I'll get in there.
That's okay. He rolled up, and I saw he put his scrub cap on, and I was like, oh, we're doing Jean's casual surgery day.
Yeah. Yes. I had already prepped for my day one way, and then got the call, and Katie and I were like, "Oh, time to go." And I'm like, "Listen, I have a 1:30 I can't miss." You know, I made it.
Did you make it?
I made it.
5 minutes to spare?
I did. And actually, I was
theme.
surprisingly I was there before the contractor, so that was pretty good.
Nice.
That's atypical for me.
So today, I actually put a poll out on Instagram to be like, hey, what should we talk about? Because I had a couple different ideas. Caroline and I couldn't make up our minds.
Correct.
So figured we'd crowdsource that and turned into kind of a follow-up to when Bree, we had our last podcast with you about Caroline's theory about flipping a coin. And when it's in the air, if you feel like you want it to land one way, just go that way.
Right.
And having kind of that screening mechanism essentially and trusting your guts. And I think there's a lot of different ways that conversation can go. I have a few different ideas or whatever, but just to start it out, kind of where did that come from you, Caroline, and kind of what have you practiced that?
Actually, yes.
Okay.
Well, and I say that it came from my brain, but my fiance Evan is convinced that I must have read it somewhere because he's like, "There's no way that you came up with that on your own," which is entirely plausible.
No,
but
full credit.
Yeah, full credit.
Full credit.
No, but so I did look it up after, because Ben was like, "Did you come up with that all by yourself?" And I was like, "I don't know. It just exists in my mind somewhere."
Yeah.
And so I looked it up, and actually I sent you that study. There was a psychology study that they did, or at least published it a few years ago, where they took groups of participants and they made them, I can't remember what the different questions were, but I think they did levels of severity questions. So more serious or progressively more, complicated decisions. And then they did the, the coin flip test. And they basically found that it didn't influence how people made their decision. Basically, I think one person had a running clock, and then the other people had the flipping coin, and the people that observed the flipping coin made the decision faster. They were that much more efficient at making a definitive decision than the people who just had the rotating clock. It takes you longer to get there because you're not trusting your gut, you're overthinking it.
Yeah.
And so I just thought that was super interesting. But yeah, it was published, I could look it up, but back in 2018 or 2019.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure it was 2018.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, it was an interesting thought, and I kind of just wanted to follow up on it and see kind of how you guys have been able to translate it both in vet school, as you are in the middle of it right now, but also in practice with you guys, and maybe how that's impacted medicine, communication with caregivers, anything like that, life decisions. Caroline, you jumping from California to all over the place. Carlo, you buying a clinic that was, floundering at best. Bree going to vet school. I have examples of my own, but they are not necessarily audience specific. So I think to start off with, Bree, I don't know if you have anything offhand, but I would love to kind of start off with you.
Yeah, even just getting to vet school, I think I've done a lot of that, just trusting the gut decision. I'm originally from Ohio, but I knew I wanted to go to Michigan State for vet school. Just by being there, I just felt like this is really cliche, but to say home, or people were just really honest and open with me about how I'm going to get to vet school. And I absolutely loved that. But being from Ohio, and out-of-state tuition is astronomical. It's ridiculous. So I was like, how is this going to happen? How can I do this? So I researched all the schools that were getting students into Michigan State that wasn't Michigan State because they're expensive.
Okay.
And so I chose Northern Michigan, which was like they had 5 students almost every year get into vet school, which was pretty substantial, like with everybody else in the area. So I went there, and I was still out of state. But then you could become an in-state resident, but you had to go through all these loopholes with them. And I was like, everyone told me it won't happen. Everyone gets denied. It's just not going to happen. And I was like,
challenge accepted.
So I did it. I worked super hard. I stayed the whole entire summer. I wrote this huge essay about like point A, B, C of like why I should have in-state tuition and how I can't afford to get out. And then there was a 2-year dorm rule too.
Okay.
And the dorms were pricey.
Yeah.
So and they said, oh, you can't get out of that. Like there's no way. You can't get out of the dorms. And I was like, another challenge accepted. So I wrote this huge essay and then ended up getting out of the dorms a year early, became an in-state resident.
Okay.
And then my thought process was, well, if I'm an in-state resident, by the time I get to Michigan State, I'll be in-state, right? But then I was like, okay, it's going to work out fine. Well, my whole plan goes according to plan, and then the week I submit my application to Michigan State, they send me an email and say, oh, by the way, you're out of state, you will pay out-of-state tuition, and you will compete against out-of-state students.
Oh.
So whole life's plan down the trash, and I was like, cool. But I was like, I feel like this is gonna work out. So lo and behold, I compete out of state, I get in out of state, all the way up until a month before school starts. We get our bills. I have in-state tuition.
Nice.
Like nothing. I was like,
Interesting.
like this is surreal. Like there's no way. There's no way. I knew this was to happen, but I just didn't know like how it was gonna happen.
Wow.
So I'm an in-state resident at Michigan State, and I can't. People ask me how I did it. I'm like, honestly, like, there's no hard evidence to say how I got it. I didn't look into it because I didn't want to cause issues for me. That like maybe it was a mistake. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think it was, but I don't know. So
little do you know you're gonna get like a bill in the mail. Like here, pay us another $20,000.
I know. I'm waiting for it to be like, oh, by the way, you owe us, and I'll be like, nope. You can have my DP.
I'm gonna just bleep out all the details, or I'm just gonna block. I'm gonna block that part from being able to be seen somewhere in East Lansing.
I have mentioned it to him before, and they're like, I don't know how you got it either, and I'm like, I don't know. I felt like it was gonna work out, so and it has so far, and I've kind of had a path that way of just going for it as much as I can, and then it just ends up working out as much as it possible. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just really happy that it's worked out this far, and I don't have this huge bill, and I'm super happy that I chose Michigan State amongst all the things that I've been offered there for sure.
So was that kind of your plan originally? Was that you wanted to go to MSU for vet school?
Yep, I wanted to go to Michigan State. I just couldn't afford Michigan State out of state tuition. It was like $40,000 for undergrad, and I was like, there's no way. Like I'm completely on my own for school. So yeah, I chose to go to a smaller school. Super happy I did. I had amazing, phenomenal experiences there, and then it ended up getting me in-state tuition. So
nice. Well, I think there's something to that though, and you know, just seeing that today's thing was about trust your gut. I don't think that trusting your gut should be confused with luck, because those are two totally different things. And you know, not to completely interject my kind of viewpoint on trusting your gut, but it's highly strategic. You know, so that when you're kind of saying that, I'm like, oh, that's actually a very strategic way to go about getting into veterinary school. Like I know for me, I mean, I was from, you know, Grand Rapids, Michigan originally, so I didn't really have the out of state thing, but like I hadn't considered being like, okay, researching how many students from each school are then accepted.
I know, that was my thought too.
Wow. Kudos, that's pretty good.
That was high school me too.
But again, you're exactly right. There is a part where it is a little bit caution to the wind, because there are factors that are out of your control. I mean, we talk about victimhood all the time, where it's like there's just things that you're made to believe that you're powerless against, but that doesn't mean you can't create new avenues. It's like this and this and this and this. It's like, no, that was like collaboration and creativity at its best, and then it worked, and that should be like highly intoxicating, because it it gets better than that, you know.
It was actually kind of, it dovetails a little bit into one of the thoughts that I had about this whole thing, and because I think the core of the idea of trusting your gut is kind of trusting yourself, right? And one of the things as I was contemplating what we were going to talk about that came to mind was, why do we have a trouble trusting our gut? You know, why do we not believe like that our intuition is right? And I think one of the biggest parts of that is that we haven't gained trust in ourselves. We haven't gone through the preparation. We haven't gone through the work to essentially earn the trust from ourselves. And I think that highlights kind of what you're saying is like, well, you already did that. You went through the process, and it's like, man, this is going to work out. Why is it going to work out? Well, it's not because I threw caution to the wind and I just, on a whim, I was going to hope. It's like, no, I busted my ass to do this, and this is going to work. Like, I know I've done everything that I can to make this work, and I'm gonna do the next thing that I have to make it work as well. And you earned that process of trusting your gut and saying that was the right thing to do, even though you did take a pretty substantial financial risk with the difference between those in-state and out-state numbers. But you had that faith, and I think that's one of the things that I had struggled with a long time. But in college and out of college didn't really do enough of the work to be like, this is the right decision. It was just like, this feels right, but also I have no idea. Is that kind of what you were getting at last week?
Well, last week it was much more simple. 2 weeks ago, it was much more simple than that because it was just trying to help Bree make a decision between like one mediocre choice and another mediocre choice. So it's a little bit different context, but it's interesting that you bring up, like basically it's the confidence and competence chart again. And what's interesting is that so I went for the law of like probability when I applied to vet school. So I applied to like 6 schools, and then I'm just like, it's a game of numbers. Like, I will get in somewhere because I'm just gonna apply to a bunch of places. But what's interesting is that so when I was younger and like my decision to go to vet school, I was I was able to trust my gut very implicitly and was like, this is what I'm doing. This is the right decision for me. Like, I'm going to do it. And my dad would always try to ask, because my dad his motto is, at work, I'm paid to worry. At home, it's my hobby. So grow up with that in your head. Right. This is why I am the way I am. But so he was super freaked out about me not getting into vet school, not because he didn't believe that I couldn't do it, but he was just concerned, like, what if she doesn't do it? Like, what then? And so he would always try to ask me, like, what's your plan B? And I'm like, plan B is try again. And he was like, what's plan C? And I'm like, try again. like this will happen. It just is like a matter of time. So like that trusting my gut and knowing that like that's the right decision for me. And I just put all my eggs in one basket and said, one of them's got to hatch, basically. But I don't know where I lost that along the way, because I would say that like now being older, I'm just starting to try and get it back. Like, we have talked a lot in here about imposter syndrome and how a lot of veterinarians suffer from imposter syndrome. And I think that and overthinking things makes it extremely difficult to trust your gut. It sort of drowns out that inner voice that's telling you, this is what you should be doing. And so it's a matter of how do you get back to that?
Yeah, and I don't want the education system to, be perceived as a persecutor.
But that's part of it.
It's part of it. But I think part of one of my issues with higher education, and this isn't just school specific, but I think I've talked about on the podcast before. It's like you take the top 10%, and then now all of a sudden they're the 100% that needs to strap back out to being top 1%, 5%, and then lower 50%. And it's like, but we're so incredibly intelligent. Like, you don't get there without actually being able to do the work, put in the work. And then also, I mean, that's part of the application process. The application process is the veterinary school essentially assessing potential. Yeah. I mean, that's really what it is. So, according to our star charts and everything, is that the idea of veterinary students coming in is that they're supposed to be, by our definition, problem child, where it's an incredible amount of potential, but no performance in this setting. The performance you had before was high school, undergraduate, Bree Kraut was actually
the best student.
They want to kind of select out that best student, and that's kind of the same thing. We're like plan ABC. The same thing with Kraut, where she was the same thing. It was just like, I didn't get in, but I'm gonna keep doing, and then eventually it hit, and then now getting through it. It's the same exact story. It's when you sort of have that like end goal, it's the goals in stone and plans in sand. Just keep writing the plans, but you want to make sure you have those goals. But to say where you kind of lost it along the way, that it's like when you take the top top 10% and be like, who's like the smartest of the ultra smart of the really smart.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, well, obviously I'm the dumbass,
Right.
you know, like,
Must
you know,
be.
must be, you know, like, and that, you know, so I think, you know, that's like, I don't necessarily joke about imposter syndrome, but I just say there's really no time for it and there's no real place for it. And that, you know, not necessarily say, you know, what got me into veterinary school and everything else. I just didn't think anything else was actually going to happen. Like it was just, well, obviously I'm going to do undergrad in 2 years and obviously I'm going to get into veterinary school and obviously I'm going to graduate. And like, I didn't really have much of a plan B or C. It was just, this is clearly what's going to happen. So it's like, it's kind of going the other way where it is, like I said, I think in hindsight now being a business owner and doing what it is we're doing with PAW is that I think it's, you know, to Bree, it's actually, there is a lot more strategy to it. You know, it's just for me, I think in my brain, I was like, well, clearly this is the only way because everything else has lined up to make that the only path, you know, so it seemed like it was particularly easy, but then you forget all the hard work that goes into it. You know, it's why I joke all the time with, you know, the success of our business. I'm like, well, obviously this is what was going to happen. And it's like, yeah, through, you know, blood, tears, you know, like, you know, yeah, constant, right. Just Ace Ventura, like showers, you know, just like, you know, like
just 20 pieces of bubble gum. Actually, I think to go along with kind of where did you lose it to? I think for me, there's a balance, and it actually I wrote down a quote that was from Einstein. It was the intuitive mind, or you know, the one who listens to their intuition. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Like, how many times do you have that thought of like, well, I have to just do like the essentially the normal thing or like the right thing to do? And I think that's for me, that's been the biggest struggle, is like trusting my gut versus what like the rational or like the outside influence is telling me what to do, and sometimes overweighing that because for, you know, fear, judgment, or failure, or whatever that might be. I think that's where a lot of people kind of like quelch down that passion and the, like, listening to their intuition. And one of the reasons why I think people listen to you so much is you tend to not do that. And you know, obviously it's shown through, and you know, there's been stumbling blocks along the way, but that, at least for me, has been my biggest barrier in trying to rationalize. Actually, you kind of brought it up when you were talking about when it was, well, we have to build a new building, and Dane was like, well, you clearly know how all of this works. It's like, well, my gut knows. I don't have any of this written down, but I know that this is right. And being able to go through that, getting that into a rational state is a really hard thing to do. That comes with practice, that comes with time, that sort of stuff. But if you can't get there, and and you need that for that decision to be made, that can be a really hard bridge to kind of get over.
And that's why actually I even kind of laugh when you look at a lot of the like corporate models and those types of things. They want to know how much money you're making per minute, you know, and it's like, like you need to turn this much in this invoice and that, and I'm just like, LOL. If
you're concerned about that, then you're going to fail.
You fucking white collars, you know, like, you know, and I mean, there is a respectable amount. I mean, you know, from a business ownership standpoint, I mean, right from day one, our accountants even to this day, we get monthly financials. So, I mean, we have a pulse on the practice as far as kind of knowing what's in and out, and, you know, payrolls and all those different things. So you just get a feel for it. It's the same thing. It's like when Dane was like, I bet you get calculated down to, then I'm like, yeah, I mean, you know, but again, it's the same thing. It's sort of just passing off the gut feel, you know, as sort of logic, which it is, because again, it is very strategic, and you have, you know, a lot of numbers to back up what's happening, and you have to look at the trends of what's happening, and then it's like, well, obviously this is the next most logical step to build a new practice, because if we continue on our growth curve per year, we're gonna get choked out, you know. I mean, Bree, you're actually probably one of the few who have driven past the old building. You know,
I stared at it this morning.
It's like how?
How?
So, barely.
I have a thought about this though. I wonder if, because you're saying that even your gut intuition is more based in logic and data. But do you think that that's dependent on whether or not you're a high theoretical person? Like, did you took your disc analysis?
Yeah, I did, but I had taken it like a year ago because I was originally going to come last summer, and I would love to take it again just because I think a lot has changed in that year. And when I took it, was like my personal relationships were not great at the time too, so there was like a lot of influence in other aspects, but I don't remember.
You were high. You were high theoretically.
Probably, I'm very detail oriented.
Yeah. So, but like, I wonder if because the three of us are all, I don't know how high your theoretical is. It is pretty high. Dang it! See, we don't have a good litmus test.
Yours is like your second or third. Well, the thing is, though, Carol, I can tell you why.
Okay, good.
So as it relates as it relates to values in a sense of analysis or needing to be able to rationalize those decisions, actually wouldn't necessarily come from being a high theoretical person.
Okay.
High theoretical would be wanting to know, like all the
gizmos,
like
how all the pieces.
Right.
Gotcha.
How does this fit together? Yours, you are not. It's high, but it's not high. It's not your highest. You don't lead with theoretical. Katie leads with theoretical.
Okay.
Like, so when that process probably went through, she was probably like, "Can we write some of this down, please? I'd really like to know how this is going to work."
Yes.
If I may so imply such a situation.
I'm fairly certain I have heard those words.
More than once. But the needing to write things down would actually be more of a behavioral tendency and also a processing thing. So it would be from a behavioral sense if we're more of a high C type person, high analytical behavioral style, but also if we are low in systems judgment and needing to work our way through the process 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if we're heavy on practical thinking.
Okay.
With Carlo being more systems, being middle theoretical, you are a high C.
Yeah.
We have 3 high ICs in the room.
No shit.
I don't remember if yours was or not. I'm gonna have to look. So that's a little bit unique, but we still have. There's this sense of being analytical, but it's also you're not being choked down by requiring it. Essentially, when you pair some of those variables together, that's when it becomes
hamster wheel.
If you pair a high S, because like a high SC is the accountant type behavioral profile. Like I'm gonna move slow and I'm gonna make sure all my P's and Q's are in order. So there's a lot of things that you can pair together, but it wouldn't necessarily be theoretical.
Gotcha.
So, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, Caroline, when you were talking this like about vet school, like you don't know where it lost like along the way of like going, and I instantly was like, it's vet school.
Yeah. I know.
Because I can right now I'm in it and I can feel the gut going away.
Yeah.
Because you get hit constantly with the humble, like you're humbled, like all the things that I'm like, oh, it'll just work out. I have repeatedly been like, crap, like it didn't work out. Heck, like I put the work in and it didn't work out. Like this semester especially, we've been completely online this whole year and it's definitely been humbling, and I can feel the gut feeling just whipping away. Because now, like, even if I'm trusting my gut, it doesn't always work out, and I think a lot of trust your gut is the outcome. And if it's successful, you're like, great, like this is working. But when you repeatedly get hit with like, this is not working, like my gut's no longer trustable. I can't trust it. So I feel like a lot of it, like when you were talking that, I was like, tough vet school. Like instantly, I'm feeling it slip away as we speak.
You're just getting like beaten down to the point where like
out anymore, and there's no like, you're not getting praised for it, you're not getting success, and you're like, well, this gut doesn't work anymore, so I need something new to hold on to, and that's rational.
Well, and I think there's a couple of things to kind of build on that with, and we start to talk about kind of getting beat down. It's really still comes back to the plans in sand, and I think that's the first one, is that the goal is you're going to graduate. That's going to happen. Yeah. It's just going to happen. Mm-hmm. So the goal is already a success. So all the stuff to get between now and graduation is just really like, how much can you take emotionally, physically? That's all. That, as far as I'm concerned, that's what veterinary school is a training ground for. Is it's just a physical and emotional test. Fine. There's you got to learn this, got to test this, got to test that. But if one foot is getting in front of the other, and even if you take 3 steps back, you're still pointed in the right direction. It doesn't matter. Recycle a class if you have to. Like, it's not the end of the world, because you've already graduated. You're already a doctor. You're already a veterinary nurse. That part's done. So that's where I think we get so locked in. You kind of had mentioned praise as a part of it. We get so locked into being like, I got good grades, I got this, I'm a successful person, this and this and this, and you see the humbling part to it. it's the same thing where it's like, yep, it's an emotional draw. It's a physical draw, but that doesn't actually mean you are less competent or will be less competent. It doesn't mean that it should affect your confidence. Because again, we have 3 definitions of confidence, but one of them is it's your individual perception of how competent you are.
Yeah.
So when you start to have those things affected, this is then kind of leading into the second part is when you're, so analytical and you're used to having like, we always talk about the ideal kind of team player, someone who can take A, B, C, D as far as a policy and figure like, oh, well, as long as I fulfill A, B, C, D, the ends are going to justify the means. But then if you're like, well, I need to know why and what's this and how does this work and how does this and this and I need to analyze, I need to assess, then you're like, all right, cool. A is now 37 steps. And if I don't understand every step of those 37 things, well, obviously I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know what I'm doing. So my confidence is trash and I can't even get it done.
Yeah.
But then in the day, you're like, but I mean, technically I did do A. It just wasn't exactly how I thought A was going to go, So that's where I think when we've had meetings about it for years, we've been talking about, and this is again now from kind of the business owner policy, procedure writer side of things. It's like, all right, well, how much do we then actually have to focus on steps 1 through 37? How much can we get away with just sort of doing the A, B, C, and D? Because the end goal is this. And actually, Dr. Dane, he and I had talked about the spirit of the law. Where it's like, but then it's, it's kind of a give and a take. So, say, where do you sort of lose it along the way? It's because we forget that the end has already happened.
Yeah.
And that's where Katie, she kind of makes it, I credit her for making the joke that I'm chasing a ghost of my own creation. But the reality is that, I already see the end. I already know what the success is, and that's all I focus on the whole time. And all this other stuff is just going to happen around me as I focus towards what that is. And that's what I kind of see as trusting your gut. Is it's the no guts, no glory type thing, where it's just like, you're going to get hit along the way. Stuff's going to suck. It's going to challenge who you are. But as you get into survival mode and it strips away all the other nonsense, you start to be like, that relationship's trash and that person's not good in my life. And this is, this is not something that I seek or gain fulfillment from anymore. You talk about CrossFit, like I freaking love it. It's like, yep. So
the process is the purpose.
Yes. Yeah. And that's exactly where I was going with it. Is that's why it always has to end with purpose and well-being. Is what is the purpose? Where do we get fulfillment from? And as long as that is what the goal is, all the other stuff can happen around you. And that's where I think for me, I pitch confidence so much because it's like, man, I've already done it. You just have to figure out how to get there.
So as you two were talking, I was self-reflecting. I was listening, but I was also self-reflecting.
It's kind of the whole point of doing these, isn't it?
Right? I know. It's like amazing how much you can self-reflect in like the 30 seconds when Carlo's talking. But at minimum.
3 minutes?
Yeah, 3 minutes. So I actually don't think mine was vet school as much. I think it was my first job, actually, that
postgraduate?
Yes.
Oh.
Because
I thought you meant like working at Gap or something.
No. I should say my first veterinary job.
There we go. There we go.
No, I worked at KFC and it was garbage.
That will ruin everyone's confidence.
It does. Yes. Cried more times on that job than I have in any other.
Yes. Allegedly.
Yes. Anyway, because vet school, like, everyone talks about how traumatic vet school was, but for me, I think it really was like the end goal. I'm cool with being bottom 20%. I'm cool with whatever, because I knew that when I graduated, I wanted to be a dairy vet. And that was my goal, was I want to be known for being like, I want to be a decent dairy veterinarian and like kind of, I don't know about expert in my field, but like, I want to feel like I have done something. I don't want to just be like the day-to-day veterinarian. Like I want to be like, decent.
Correct. Yes.
I don't know.
Have impact.
Yeah, have impact. Yes, that is a good way of putting it. And so seeing that goal, I think vet school was just the process for me. I was like, I just need to like do this and pass and get whatever, and then get into my job and be able to do what I wanted to do. But that first job, like, it stripped away my confidence completely. And it's because of that lack of mentor, like the expectation for what that type of mentor relationship would be, and then not being able to get it and getting the constant reprimand of, why are you not doing this? Why are you not better at this? Why don't you inherently know how to do this? Like basically just being an endless disappointment to my boss at the time. And eventually making the decision to, like, I can't be in this job anymore, like basically feeling so like, because I mean there was the added component of living so far away, like not having any kind of support structure like while I was living in California. And so it was like I've been beaten and brutalized and like no one is here to like prop me up, and I just need to like run home with my tail between my legs. And I really think that was because like just calling your boss and telling them like this happened and I didn't know what to do about it, so this was the decision that I made, and then getting berated for that decision, like absolutely berated, and having things taken away from you because like then being punished on top of it. And so it's that I think is what absolutely destroyed my confidence, because my goal was always to be a good dairy vet. And like my goal actually, because realistically, like my written in stone goal had to change.
Yeah.
Like instead of wanting to have fulfillment as a dairy veterinarian, it's like I just had to find fulfillment in general.
Well, that kind of happened. They attempted to do that to you in vet school. That was that's your clinical rotation story. It probably worth reciting because Bree might not know it, and it's been a while on the podcast.
I'm intrigued as I'm heading into clinics.
Yes. Yeah, it was. I'll be knowing that we have a bit more university audience. I'll be a little more non-specific, but yes, the. So again, it's like I said a few minutes ago. So the goal was I had already graduated. I'm going to be a doctor, right?
Yep.
But there was also a part of it that it was so exciting to get into clinics because it's like, holy shit, I'm done with bookwork.
Right.
Like I'm done.
Right. Yeah.
It's over. No more tests except for, of course, the NAVLE. But it was like there's no more tests. So my first rotation, January 1st, was historically one of the most difficult rotations of veterinary school. And everyone's like, oh, anyone who takes it the first time, they always fail. And I'm just like, all right, cool, then I'll plan on failing. Like that was just sort of my thing. But so I had, first day, and I was so excited to be in the clinic. Now, High Eye, right? High Eye was engaging like all the full-time, technicians who work, down in the hospital, and hey, how's it going? And all the doctors like, hey, and residents, hey, it was just like, I'm just here. It's like, fuck, this is awesome, Day 2 of the rotation, the head clinician took me into his or her office and said that, essentially, I don't like who you are. I don't like how you talk. You're way too cavalier around here, and that's not how this clinic works. That's not how things are done around here. And I remember looking at him or her, and in my head, I was like, well, fuck this bitch, first of all. That was the first thing. And, so that's part of that high confidence part where I was like, well, this person isn't actually, first of all, I have no idea who you are. I don't really care how anyone talks about me to me because, first of all, like, if it's someone I respect speaking ill of me, that might cut a little bit. But this person, like, LOL.
Who are you?
Yeah, so my first reply to her was, I was like, or him, is that, I said, I'm like, nah, I'm like, you like me. She's like, what? I'm like, no, you like me. And she's like, well, how do you know, how do you know what you're talking about? I said, because I'm everything you can't be. Ooh. And, and she was just, right. Yeah, I know. And she's like, what? And I was like, well, I'm not institutionalized. I said, I'm coming in with a completely different persona, of course, then I failed, but anyway, so that was kind of my first go at clinical. And then what ended up happening, he or she then sent out an email to every single clinician in the vet school to say, well, this kid, Carlo, watch out for him. You should probably fail him on his rotate, and it had gone out to all the residents, all the clinicians, and some of my friends were residents as well. So from that one experience, it was actually my best experiences were in my large animal rotations because large animals think small animals crazy.
Yes.
You know, so yes.
Because they are.
Right, because they are. Yes. They know they're crazy.
Yes.
So that was then when I got when I got kind of further down the line. Gretchen Flo, she actually had a rotation with her, had mid-rotation evaluations, and she's like, what's this email that I got, like 6 months ago? She's like, you actually know what you're doing. She's like, you're nothing like they said. And then the same thing come through Beal and Jukowitz on my mid-rotation for emergency. As they were just like, you're actually very, very smart. I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, I know, yeah. But it was kind of that same thing where it's you have people who really try to kind of knock you off the pedestal that you're on, and it was still the same thing where it was like, I'm already a doctor at the end. I just have to go through these 4 years to get the certificate, and then I can start to do medicine calculations. Like, that's what it is. And it was never really losing sight of that. So it's, where do you get knocked off? I'm not going to say that I haven't felt failure in, the 15 years that I haven't, it was humbling when I failed that rotation. It was humbling when I failed the Navali the first time around. Like, I mean, all of those things happened, and it's just like, okay, all right, let's just do one more thing and then get this done and then on to the next. And then it compounds. Then you just start doing, and that's what I kind of talk about, the curse of the problem solver is then, once your experience and being able to get in-state tuition, like curse the problem solver. It's like once it starts to leach in, and then it's just like, okay, that felt really good. What's sort of the next one,
Yeah.
So to say that you feel your gut going away, it happens, and they challenge it. And that's where, for me, it always at the end of the day comes back down to, no, I'm already a doctor or, veterinary nurse. I'm already at the end. I just have to kind of hang it out and make sure that that the challenges that you face do not make you lose sight of what that end goal is.
Are you saying I am inevitable?
When what?
He's not going to get that reference.
Dang it!
At
Oh, yeah, I
all.
suppose, because he hasn't watched a movie in like the last 10 years.
He's such a dork. He doesn't watch movies.
Yeah.
It's from
Thanos.
Avengers.
Oh, okay.
But the concept is it's the bad guy number one, which
Oh, Thanos, sure.
Yeah.
Depending on how you feel about humanity.
It's
Yeah.
the bad guy, Caroline. But the concept is essentially, it doesn't matter what you throw at me, we're going to get to the same end point.
Yeah.
You can literally travel time and try and break this process, and I'm still gonna win.
Yeah.
Right.
Obviously, he loses at the.
Or there wouldn't be a movie.
Or there wouldn't be or there wouldn't be more movies, anyways.
Yeah.
But that to me, that's when you talk about like you're already a doctor, you're already there, you're already top 10% at a minimum. I think a part of that is you're essentially putting the defense mechanism into the people's heads that are listening, like you're already there. It's really hard to be in the middle of it and tell yourself that like that's a gift. You were probably born with that gift, or you were given that gift by somebody. I don't know. But most people don't have that intrinsically. Most people are going to go into that scenario assuming blindly maybe that those that are there to educate are also those that are there to support,
Right.
and then they just get obliterated by it.
The teachers stop being teachers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's
the mentors stop being mentors.
Yeah.
I think for me is like I feel like it's a battle between like the theoretical person and the person who's like, oh, I've been trusting my gut. It's fine because like I have this goal. I can see in my head of like what 10 years from now looks like, owning the practice, making it be what like I dream of it being, and like everything involved with that. But then it's like the mid steps where I'm like, but the theoretical person is like, how are you gonna get there? Like, what if this doesn't happen? Which is why the last podcast we did together, like finding the dream practice. Well, if that doesn't happen, then I'm never gonna get to the end point, which isn't true. Like, it'll be fine. I'll make it. Like 10 years from now, life's gonna be great. We'll hope. But like it's like a constant battle now between, because school teaches you to be like more theoretical. Like you got to be detail oriented. Like how are you gonna get there? How are you gonna make that diagnosis?
Right.
So I feel like it's a battle right now.
Yeah.
Me to choose, like, I want the end goal, I can see the end goal, but how am I going to get there? Kind of thing.
One thing, too, that I'll kind of check your thought pattern on is you asked two questions right away that I think you should keep mutually exclusive. Is one is how are we going to get there? But the second one was, well, what if this happens? And to me, those are two very, very different things, because you can write a plan as much as you can, and you're going to have your big steps along the way. You already kind of have that laid out, but you just have to go through it. And then once you get to the what if, Like, you're not going to know what to do in the what if scenario that's 2 years from now today.
Right.
There's too much data to gather.
Yeah.
So
But my brain will try to do it.
I'm trying.
I understand that it will try to do it, but what I'm saying is that
Yes.
is a waste of time.
Yeah. Well, and it's the growth through experience.
Right.
So, I
Right.
mean, that's when we talk about on our creating accountability diagram. That's why collaboration is actually so important, because collaboration actually anticipates repeated falls. So it's only ever a failure once you deem yourself a victim. It's only ever a failure once you start to name out persecutors. So if you stay within that collaborative cycle, the idea is that you actually continue to fall and then one finally pops. So that's where you have to kind of have that, like you said, that individual assessment to, take a step back and look at yourself in that scenario. But why did this fail? But I think what I'm trying to get at is the experience part. When time moves along, you actually, like you said, you get more data on either why it did or didn't work, but it actually becomes a more complex thought accidentally. So it's when you're trying to plan in the beginning where it's like, well, here's all of the things and all the variables and theoretical and, systems and process. And here's all the things. And it's this, A through 1 through 90 and D 1 through 60. And then you get 5 years down the road and you're like, I didn't know anything. Like LOL self, so that's kind of how, like, I kind of lean into that, sometimes probably more than I should, but I lean into that being like, all right, well, we kind of just have to do this because we don't actually have the data to really have a really full plan.
Take the tumor out.
Yes. Take the tumor out.
Take the tumor out.
Yes, we should flash up images of that here this last week, where it was just like, here's this animal who of course it has a splenic tumor, which in no way, shape, or form is going against the ultrasound findings. It was like, no, there's this big thing, and it's just like, this needs to come out.
The law of probability dictates that it should be a splenic mass.
Yes, not.
And we did talk about it, but that's why I bring it up, is because that's what you're getting at, is like.
Yes.
Your brain's just sitting there like, what is this? What do I do with this? It's trying to make lists, and it's like, just take the tumor out.
Right. Yes.
Just start somewhere.
Just start doing it. Try not to have this 7-pound fluid bag rupture in the abdomen.
Yeah.
Like, that's 2 goals.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's the whole thing. But yeah, so I think that's where you do have to kind of play both sides a little bit, because, and that all comes back to what this podcast is, a trust in your gut. It's you have to be respectful that, I kind of make a joke. That's why I like Back to the Future, those 3 movies so well, because you have the opportunity to actually like go back and, tell yourself something that would help the future. So that's kind of how I think about it, is myself, and this sounds insane, but I put myself into the mindset of 15 years from now, and I'm actually already there. So that's when I talk about the goals. It's like, well, obviously this is going to happen. So what I need to do is that Carlo needs to talk to this Carlo and give this Carlo advice on how to get to that Carlo.
That is actually
it's insane. Yes. But it's if you have the gift of being able to see the future, what would you tell yourself?
Right.
It's the same thing. What would you tell yourself on high school me or middle school me? And that's, I think, ultimately then when you start to then look at all the experiences of like our elders, right? Our tribe elders, where it's the grandparents are telling us and the parents are telling us, and look at this life experience. And you're like, I'm young and you don't know anything because you don't live in this world today. And they're like, but I promise there are some things that I know, and that's again, so you try to play all those variables to then again coming back to trusting your gut. And it's just like, all right, I'm actually kind of cool with not having all of the data on all of the variables, because actually I know exactly where I'm headed, and all the other things are going to happen around me. It's just a matter of getting right to that point and letting those other things happen, and don't feel like you have to control all of those other things, and let some of them just blow over you and be like, wow, this was a really big deal, but also kind of it wasn't, and it's protecting your, and that's why I think vet school is such a training ground for emotional and physical fatigue. That's what actually I think I got out of veterinary school, was just being able to handle the emotions and physical fatigue. Because when you get out, if you can understand how to manage your personal outlets, so whether it's going to the gym or running or creative outlets between artwork or music or whatever it is, even some people like to do singing and dancing, it doesn't matter, whatever your outlet is, That's how you deal with stress. That's how you deal with emotional fatigue. That's how you deal with physical fatigue. And then when you get out, it's, I just spent the last 2 to 4 years creating a coping mechanism for when shit actually hits the fan. Because when I'm in veterinary school, I forget the fact that I'm already graduated. I just have to wait 4 years, you know? So it's, if you start to learn how to navigate sort of that physical and emotional fatigue, you're actually way ahead of the curve on what to do when you come up to some of those real life experiences. Your first anesthetic patient dies, or, you know, your first case, or you get your first complaint or whatever. You start to be like, oh, this is actually draining me emotionally and physically, but guess what? I have this that I can do to help cope with that. So that's why, like I said, I am cautious to call veterinary school the persecutor, because being a creator, I look at it like, okay, not going to be able to change that variable, but what can I learn coming out of it? Because I'm not going to be powerless to the effects of the education system or the effects of my first job. I'm not going to be a victim to what that does to me. What can I learn and grow from this, and how can I start to manage myself as a human in that world? And that's why I wouldn't consider it a persecutor.
And I think that it's funny because that does come up, like seeing some posts made by veterinarians that feel like they're so stuck. And I think a very common theme of those types of posts is that they only have work. They only have being a veterinarian as their
defined
self-identity.
Entity.
So they don't necessarily, either they've forgotten those coping mechanisms or they don't have time to engage them. And so when the floor drops out from under you, what do you have left? So, and I think that's part of what happened to me in California. Is part of my coping mechanism in vet school was surrounding myself with people who prop me up, like friends, and, you know, going out and being able to be social and like just blow off steam. And then going there on my own and being so isolated, I was like calling people, like crying, like I don't have anybody and I don't know what to do and I just have my dog, and like, so I think that's a very good point. And I think some people probably, it might take some self-reflection of being like, in this moment, like what are the other things in my life that I have to fall back on?
Please
I
do.
actually saw a post not too long ago. It was like an ad for some like online thing that you could do as a veterinarian. It said how to be happy as a veterinarian, and that broke me. Like I read that on Facebook, and I was like, this should not be a thing. Like how is that an ad? I don't feel like that should have been like their slogan, but I was like, oh my gosh. But I feel like a lot of veterinarians that they, or at least taught in vet school, is that like there was a hole in vet med, and a lot of people keep falling into it and falling into it. And I think a lot of it is exactly what you're saying. It's just I just want to bring that up because I was like, I read that post and I was like,
it's absolutely
that is awful. Like that's what my life looks like when I graduate. Like not my life, because I'm gonna make it not my life. But that's what they're portraying to me, is like, that's vet med. You have to go strive to be happy when you graduate, because there is a hole and a lack of fulfillment, because all your whole life is just vet med.
Well, it's interesting because this actually brings up one of the topics, and we probably shouldn't fully dive into this today because it's its own topic, but it does lead into your thing about awareness versus like solutions. And so just being aware of the problem isn't enough. You really have to already be ahead of the game of like, okay, I'm aware that there is a problem, but now what are we going to do about it?
I think actually one thing that I do want to kind of highlight about you specifically in the concept of trusting your gut, though, and kind of where we're at and like losing yourself and not being happy and all that is, you talk about vet school is a training ground for physical and emotional fatigue, absolutely. But I think what happens is, especially now as the generations turned over, it's gone from slowing down on competence to slowing down heavily on confidence. We've already observed that. We've talked about that a lot. So you have individuals that are graduating with no confidence whatsoever. A part of that process is forgetting who they are personally. I think we've kind of identified that in just like assessment data, where they flatten out, they forget who they are. Been through that in episode 16, which is team crafting. Talk about that one. But one thing about you, Bree, and I'll just bring this up as an example, is you weren't afraid to tattoo the hell out of your arms. And a part of that is there's a confidence, right? Like there's a gut instinct that says it doesn't matter.
Nope.
It doesn't actually matter. And I think like, and I have tattoos myself, but no one ever sees them. But like a part of that process is trusting your gut and being like, I'm not going, it's forever. There's no taking this one back. It's one of those things that you really just can't undo. And I think, when you look down, it's probably something that probably will help keep you sane throughout your career. Is like, well, I did this, like, and I still love and appreciate this. So like, what's another thing? Am I a crazy person for thinking that?
No, and I don't want to go too much of a tangent, but I remember, like, my parents are very conservative. They're very, like, they told me when I got I was never allowed to have, I went to Chicago to meet my sister as 18. I got, like, my first nose piercing and, like, my little small tree tattoo. My mother was, like, beside herself. She was like, you're never going to get into vet school. You have no more dreams. Like, your whole life is gone. And I was like, oh my God, like chill. Right. Yeah, so then I did wait to get my first sleeve until after I was accepted to veterinary school. And once I was accepted to vet school, I was like, well, they can't kick me out now. And like, it's part
I already graduated.
Right? I was like, well, it's part of that confidence too, is that I know, like, while I've hit roadblocks and things, like, I know I'm going to be a great veterinarian. I know I'm going to be a powerhouse in the veterinary field. And I've had things along the way to tell me, like, that will happen. It's just a matter of time. So I know that, like, it's part of being an example too, because I do a lot of things with the veterinary school in general, being a leader in the veterinary school, and I get a lot of questions from like prospective students. They go like, well, don't you have to cover those up? And I'm like, no, because I would never want to work for a place that would choose, like, that's how you get perceived. Like, if you have tattoos or no matter, like, what is on them and things, like, that's who you are. Like, that's not who I want to work for anyways. And it's kind of like a test for me too, is to see, like, can I stick with myself? And if I enter a practice that goes, like, hold up, like, you're crazy, like, you didn't think that through or anything, it's like, well, that's okay, because I don't want to work for you anyways. And I know that I'm going to be a great veterinarian one day. I can already see it. I'll be a great veterinarian one day, and I hold myself to that standard, or at least a standard where I feel like everything else around me kind of props that up anyways. Like, maybe if I was, like, someone who didn't do anything and, like, I don't know, was a poor person, I don't know, but didn't have a good example or something, maybe that'd be different. But I do feel like I have a good ground system that, like, whether what tattoos I have or not, it's not going to matter, because in the end, I will get the gold.
Exactly, and that's kind of where I was going with it. Is like, it actually doesn't matter at all. Like, you're grounded to the point where it's like, okay, now we're just building up from here. And as we talked about, with last time you were on, we talk about that interviewing process for clinics. Well, that just accelerates it. That just makes it that much easier. Right. So it's just something I want to talk about, because it is unique for you. It's not something that isn't terribly common amongst anybody that is less than 30.
It's kind of funny, because my there's no other person in veterinary medicine, at least the school right now, that has, like, lots of tattoos, except for my significant other has a full sleeve, and I, like, can't figure out if my brain was like, yes. Like, you did it too. Like, we both know this is gonna be okay. Like, I can't figure out if that's the reason or not, but regardless, it works out.
It certainly helps. It was just something that I knew was relatively unique. But one of the other things too, as we've got a little bit of time left here, to talk about the concept, to kind of go back with the trusting your gut process in. Actually, I just want you to share the story, because I know it, but I don't even know if Caroline necessarily knows it, but Bree most likely wouldn't either. I hope
I know it.
Well, is that purchase decision process for the clinic of itself? Like, you had a lot of data, but a lot of it was also like, well, this is just what we have to do. Or I guess maybe if there's another story, but I think one of the things that a lot of people respect about you is the fact that it's just like the gut goes first most of the time, and then your brain fills in the details, and it's pretty good at it. But to walk us through kind of that process.
Yeah, I mean, it actually kind of speaks to me doing undergrad and veterinary school the way that I did. Is it was the only picture that I saw. And I think only now in the last year and a half have I kind of started to learn that that's actually how my brain works. Is I work like, I don't see words when I just see pictures. So for me, I just have to describe the picture that I see to people. Which I don't know if everyone functions that way, but I've been told that, yes, right, okay, so, like, and I didn't know that, I just thought that's how my brain worked. I'm like, well, this is just how people think and talk. So for me to be very kind of pictures, is like a lot of how my brain processes is it's a bunch of snapshots all at the same time very fast. So what ends up happening for me is a lot of the times I have to look at different variables and I may only see part of the picture, and then it might take, a week, a month, a year, some experience to be like, oh yeah, that's right, I saw this other picture and that's how that links together. So kind of leading up to the ownership part, it was like I'm just kind of looking at this entire picture, and eventually that's kind of in its very pictorial form. That's where our industry overview came from, because that's kind of how my brain assembles data, and that's just the word part, that's not the photo part. But so when I was kind of getting up to the ownership part, because Katie was having her experiences at a couple of different employers in the 3 to 4 years we were out of school. I knew that I had my experiences as I was getting through kind of after hours medicine, and then you start to hear other classmates' experiences, and even talking to some of the older veterinarians that own practices, and them kind of speaking of their qualms. Because remember, for our practice we had at that time I think 29 referring practices, so you kind of would occasionally throw cases and then just kind of shoot the shit for 5 minutes. So it was just this whole process of starting to assemble all this data together and being like, oh, our industry is having a problem with talent because of 1, 2, 3. We're having problems with culture because of 1, 2, 3. So it's that taking that step back, and then it finally clicked. The only way any of this is going to get better is if someone stands the fuck up and be like, no, we are not going the way of corporate medicine. We are not going the way of tradition. Both of those are broken for 2 totally different reasons. What else is out there? Nothing. Cool. Well, we aren't going to be able to do what we're doing for the next 30 years as associate veterinarians. I don't want other Carlos in kindergarten wanting to be a vet and having to come into whatever world of veterinary medicine is 25 years from now. So that's why, again, the joke is I am kind of chasing a ghost of my own creation. It's because it had snapped one night where I saw that final picture of the whole thing, and I was like, crap, this is the only way that this is actually going to work. So then it was the analytics side where it was like, all right, cool, let me survey how many, because I'm like, I bet you all these vets are for sale right now. So we surveyed the entire state. Like I said, the recruitment team, the stat was 450 clinics, 390 were able to, not even for sale, they were just like, please take this clinic off our hands. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, and then going to, so then I did up more data kind of in our area, because at the beginning of Paw Health was a little bit different on mergers and acquisitions. Not that it matters, but, kind of that plan in the beginning is what I ended up going to my employers with. I called a board meeting and a board member flew in from out of state. And then of course I was late to that meeting. And then so all these things kind of started to assemble together. And, there was one thing at the very last meeting that we had, or that they had as a board, that I came to, and once they finally made their decision that they didn't want to be a part of what I was doing, one of the more progressive members of their team, I overheard him talking to one of the other people at the table, and he was like, this is the first time in my career that I felt like the old guy at the table. Like there was a time when they were progressive, because remember, these are the people that were coming out of veterinary school in the 90s, and they were the trendsetters for specialty. All the referral centers you see started with these peeps, and now they're no longer the trendsetters. Now that is the standard of care.
Mainstream,
They're mainstream. So that's where then, like I said, all these things kind of started to merge together, and then it was like, all right, okay, him saying that lets me know that I'm on the right course, and they had referred to it as not the cutting edge, but the bleeding edge. Like, all right, kid, just get out there and run and go with it. And then, of course, like I said, Dr. Katie, it was, she was very much on that analytical side. But, I remember one very, very almost haunting conversation that I had with her is it was exactly that. It was like, we have to do this. There actually isn't any other option. There's no other option. We have to do this. And I think that's where, a part of, the struggles that we've had in our personal lives and professional lives, I do carry guilt for that, because it was like, crap, I don't actually see it any other way, and we're going to fall along the way, we're going to stumble along the way, there's going to be times that suck, but in the end, like, it's, you know, it's the learning, earning, yearning. We are in the earning part of our lives. Like, if we can make this work and maximize it, it's not just going to be beneficial for us, but it's going to be beneficial for the entire industry. And that was the switch that flipped. That was the picture that I saw. I was like, oh my God, if we can actually make an impact on the industry, it's going to change the way the game is played. And then, of course, Simon Sinek with the Infinite Game and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, that was the ultimate sort of vision that I had, is really creating a new future. And it's not so much of, you know, raising the bar or, you know, setting the bar. It's we have a completely new ladder that we're creating to put brand new rungs on, and those are the rungs of accountability. And through the rungs of accountability, we're going to pull ourselves out of this trench. We're going to pull ourselves into what we as an industry not just deserve, but what we need. So it's like you saying, we had, you know, I read this thing where it's how to be happy as a veterinarian should never exist in this world. Yeah. It exists. I'm not saying that the factors that didn't lead to that post don't exist, but it's that we should never be at that point. Yeah. But it's more than just, you know, us spitballing up in northern Wisconsin. There's, you know, factors in Michigan, there's factors in Ohio, there's factors in, you know, Boston, there's factors in LA. So, but as long as we as an industry realize that tradition has passed, corporate medicine is not our future, we have to start to, through those rungs of accountability, pull ourselves out into what the future of the industry is. And that was the whole thing that I saw when it was like, we should probably buy that clinic and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, and that's like the reason I wanted you to tell that story is like, you can now surmise it all into 5 minutes. You couldn't do that before whatsoever. Like, you guys, I wish that I could have video recorded that meeting, because it was 4 hours.
Oh, I can see that.
like Carlo walked into the room with 7 pieces of paper, just with doodle scratch all over them, and we're like, wait. That's it. And it was so horribly conceptual, like in the best of ways, but it wasn't that precise. It wasn't that easily consumable. And you talk about like the guilt and of like the hardship of that learning. Well, it's, you know, that's valid and it's fair. You know, you have sacrificed a ton, both you and Katie and your family and everybody that works here and all that. And but for what reason? Is to get to this point. And it all started with that gut call of like, I don't even have all the data. I really don't. Like, I see these 9 variables that are causing 3 major problems, and here's some ideas for some solutions, and I think this is going to work. Go.
Right.
And there was no, I mean, there was probably some hesitation at some point along the way. I think actually you and I had talked about it once on a podcast where it was like, I feel myself getting comfortable.
That's it. Yeah, that would then be that's the problem of tradition. Yeah. So it's and like I said, it comes right back to being the old guy at the table. Yeah. You know, and part of it is financial success, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, we kind of talk about how every year we just keep reinvesting the money back into the business. It's not our money, it's the business's money, it's the people's money. Let's just keep putting it back in. And that was, you know, kind of part of that is you know, with that reinvestment, with the money that was going out, it's like you get comfortable in being like, so that's more money than I've ever seen in my life.
Right.
You know, and it's just like, well, now I've made it. We don't have to do anything else. We've got it, you know, and that was why, you know, part of the reason why Katie and I were bestowed the honor of Young Alumni of the Year, you know, to invest into the veterinary school course, the house mentorship program, to finance that entire thing. They're like, so you guys are like 30 and doing this? You're giving us how much money for this thing or whatever? And it's like, well, yeah, but there comes a point where you just realize that money is no longer an asset. Money is a tool, you know. So it just kind of greases those wheels. So the comfort that I've felt, I can probably mark 2 times in the last 5-6 years that I felt comfortable. It's because you fall back and then it's like, oh, well, this is fine and good the way that it is, and I don't need to keep pushing, because if I keep pushing, I might die, you know. And it's like, then you kind of partly die a little bit. I think I've only hit the ER twice.
Only because you refused to go a few times.
Well, there's that variable.
We are talking about when I actually went, yes.
It doesn't matter.
Right. Yes. But again, so that's part of that getting comfortable, you know, is that it's, you know, it is, I don't want to say, and that's okay. I mean, that's okay. Like there's going to come a point where like feeling comfortable isn't necessarily bad, as long, because we talk about tier 4 of the education system. So tier 4 of the education system is either individual advancement or industrial advancement. So individual advancement is we're going to just knock the hell out of this locally, and I'm going to fix this stuff locally, and I'm going to have more people come into this locally, and we're going to help all those people locally and everyone who comes in. Industrial advancement is, I need to make sure there's more people that hear what we're doing. And that was where I think for me, the definition of getting comfortable was that I was starting to fall behind on industrial advancement. For me, the definition of getting comfortable is focusing on individual advancement. So there's nothing wrong with that. That's why, like I said, between owners, between associate veterinarians, between nurses, like all of those things are important because we still have individual advancement that is so necessary in tier 4, but that's then where you might have some
infect as many people that way.
Yes, correct. Yes, and well, exactly right. So that's kind of the way that I see it. Is, you know, we talk about you know, eventually one day, quote unquote, becoming a successful veterinarian. Well, that was actually then for me why I push hard into industrial advancement on tier 4, is because I actually only have the ability to influence and make an impact on the number of animals that I am physically able to see in a year. So if I'm only physically able to see 1,000 animals per year, 2,000 animals per year, that's the scope of my impact, which absolutely can be providing the fulfillment to some people who gain fulfillment from that level of impact. There's nothing wrong with that. But then it's like, what happens if it's like 10,000?
Right.
Yeah. And then it's like, shit, we just turned out 15,000 invoices last year. All right, that feels pretty good. What happens if it was 150,000? Right. You know, and that's then again just comes back to the curse of the problem solver. Okay, cool. How do I get to that mark now? I don't know. I never thought we'd be to 15,000. So how do we get to 150,000? And then it's like, and it's the people. It's just more people, more words, more people aligned with it, and then they sort of make it what they need to make it locally, in, you know, whatever variables that they have. But there are some pretty obvious standards of business. I'm not saying that everything needs to be reinvented, but there are some things that are universal, I should say.
I would say at this point, you're gleaning more insight outside of this industry than you are inside. Like substantially. You're like beautifully naive to the things that happen outside of the veterinary world. It's like, Carlo, that already happens.
Yes.
Lots of people already do that.
What was the thing? There was something that I had told you guys about appointments. This was already like over a year ago on one of the other things. And I just remember telling Ben there was some structure to an appointment in
how
GP.
Like everything has like their 20-minute blocks.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. You were like, what is a 20-minute appointment?
Oh, because you've only ever been triage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were like, that's just asinine.
Yes.
Let's make sure we can't give everyone the amount of time that they need.
Right.
Let's just solidify that.
I mean, perfect example. I had 3 allergy consultations yesterday, and I was like, each one of these is 45 minutes long.
Yeah.
Minimum to hit all the high points. And I think I do put people to sleep toward the end. Like I feel them like drifting away, and I'm like, I have to find a way to shorten this. But there is so much information that needs to be said. I'm like, you can't do this in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, we always joke, if there's a GI, Carlo's gone for 40 minutes.
I have gotten faster.
He's gotten
but it still takes time. Like your other consultations, your talk paths are more abbreviated, but that's just, it's you know, everyone has their thing. Everybody has their thing.
Right. And that's why you see in a lot of GPs, like you don't stay on schedule because it's impossible to stay on schedule. I worked GP. I just got my last job. That was actually an emergency clinic, but the rest of them all be GP, and there's no such thing as a 20-minute appointment. You can say it, but it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It's not practical.
But then we're just going to keep doing it.
Not fix anything. Like you just have to get better. You need to fix yourself to get better. And you're like, I physically cannot.
Okay, sure. Let's keep doing it.
I don't think you understand. This is not possible.
Yes.
I think a part of that too is like that's when you get into that habit of over-analysis, because you're trying to over-predict every question that anybody can ask about whatever the ailment is or whatever. And then you just get up to that, like, I can do this all in 20 minutes. And then one more question hits and there goes, shit, here comes 10 more minutes. And you can't, you can't predict that far ahead into the future, and you have to give yourself that wiggle room. And if you try to have that super concise talk path, you're just going to get derailed more than you're going to be successful.
One of the things that I've been really, probably the last decade for sure, I've been talking about with caregivers and also students or whoever, is that I talk about the difference between clinical medicine and diagnostic medicine. Diagnostic medicine is you have to run the test to find the answer. Clinical medicine is you have to talk to figure it out. So when what clinical medicine is disease progression. We tried this, it didn't work. We tried this, it did work. So when you talk more on clinical medicine, so my best analogy that I have for people when I find consults getting very long, because we had a patient, this is a perfect example here this last weekend, a patient come in, it was recheck blood work like 3 days later, and liver values were like substantially worse than they were the 3 days prior. And they're like, well, what's going on? What's wrong with our patient? We don't even know what's wrong. And I was like, okay. I said, we need to first define on what we do and don't know. I said, when we talk about clinical medicine and diagnostic medicine, I said, clinical medicine is I like to eat cereal. Diagnostic medicine is I like Golden Grams. So, and they're like, seriously. And the people are like, oh, I was like, yeah. So when we say we have liver disease, that's us liking cereal. Yep. I said, so if you want to figure out what kind of cereal we got, ultrasound guided biopsies, surgical biopsies, ultrasound, CTs, all these other things. And like, and the husband in the background was like, I like to, he's like, we're going the cereal route. And I was like, perfect, but again, that so far has been, so and that's why, like I said, I think I've become shorter in my consultations because when people say, well, we don't know what's wrong, we're going to run through 40 different rule outs of hepatic disease. I could probably do 10 right now, at best, maybe 3. So, it's like, to say to run, well, and this, and then 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 this, I step back and I say, okay, listen, there's 2 sides to this. Yeah. There's clinical and there's diagnostic. I said, if you're asking me like categorically what's wrong, that's clinical. But if you're trying to talk to me about specifically what's wrong, right, we as an industry may not actually have the diagnostic tool to provide you that answer.
Yeah.
I said, so the tests that we have are trying to figure out what kind of cereal we have, but we might not actually have the right test.
Yeah.
So there's going to come a point where we have to stop testing and start treating. And then when we start treating, we're going to get better or worse. And that's clinical medicine. And
that's
people are
also
like,
trusting your gut.
That's how I was going.
Yeah.
That is exactly what that
full
is.
Full circle.
Yes, full circle.
Yep.
So it's, and that's why it's really kind of just for me, a big concept on how are we as humans functioning. And that's what you said, I'm naive to those things outside of the industry. That's actually why from the beginning I loved working with you on the strategic planning side now as part of our team, because I would say all these things and you're like, yeah, that's a thing. I'm like, yes, it's a thing.
Somebody wrote a book about that.
Yeah, there's a book on that? And he's like, yes, like a whole thing. And you just rattled it off and like you didn't even read it. And I was just like, but that's what I see, and then it's the picture. And anyway, but yeah, so it's all the same thing. That's why trusting your gut is, important through veterinary school. Once you get onto clinical practice, once you talk about ownership, once you talk about life goals, all of these things, it's a matter of how much are we focusing on, do I like cereal or what kind of cereal do I like?
Yeah.
And that's for me, ultimately what the balance comes down to on trust your gut is there's times to just understand that you're going to walk down the aisle, just grab some boxes and it's going to be good enough. And there's going to be other times where I just really need to make sure that if my kids don't have Lucky Charms at home, it's going to be hell. Like there is a time where both work. So it's just understanding that and respecting it.
I get, like, for me, I'm super curious how that translates, because I think for you, and the thing that you've learned in experience is like, and I'm kind of curious, but I'm going to have Caroline answer this first, is in actually communicating with caregivers, because this will be something that'll be really helpful for you once you get into clinicals, is like, how variable are your communications and what's the deciding factor? Because to me, like, I especially with my history in understanding assessment data and like really diving deep into stuff with like one-to-one interactions and me working with people and having data on the table, and this is how this works, and I can super analyze that sort of stuff, but I can't do that with a stranger. So I'm going with my gut. Now I've done the work to back it up, to have the thought and be like, I know what you're saying, I can hear it, I can see it. But for you, it's more going to be experience based. But what is the deciding factor if you like, do you just you walk in for whatever the ailment might be, do you have your talk path, or do you play the room? How do you kind of work that out?
I think for me, because I still operate somewhat from a defensive position, so I make sure that I hit all of my informed consent. And I do think that starts to be a little overwhelming for some people, because it's a little bit like I said, you start to get that, like, their eyes kind of, it's over the phone, so I can't see their eyes glazing over, but you can hear it in their voice when they're just like, they're disengaged. And so there is some degree to that. And for like, to hit that minimum baseline, I just kind of push through, because I'm like, I have to at least talk about these things and document informed consent, because it's just necessary for standard of care. But then beyond that, it starts to be, what questions do you get? So like, if they ask the question that's like, oh, you are actively listening to what I'm saying, you're engaged in what I'm saying, you understand these concepts. And so I do try to ask some follow-up questions like, are you understanding me? What questions do you have for me? Those types of things, to try and see kind of where we're at with the level of understanding. Because I do sometimes have to repeat myself several times for it to kind of start to sink in. But it's funny, because the trust your gut thing also comes up with caregivers. Like, basically, my whole goal in my consultation is getting to a point where the caregiver will trust their gut. And so I'm like, my job is just to give you enough information and informed consent that you can trust your gut making a decision. And I often do talk about like I say medical management versus like clinical, but it means kind of the same thing. It's like, are we going to treat symptomatically and see how patient responds to therapy, or do you want to continue down the path of diagnostics? Because we have the ability to do both. It's just, how much information do you need to trust your gut and trust the decision? And then how is the patient, like, what is the overall kind of, how is the patient responding to therapy, and what is their quality of life like? So,
well, to me, that's what you're doing in that process, is you're just finishing the equation of patient expense, emotional expense, and financial expense. You cannot make that decision for them.
Correct.
And if you try to, you're going to fail more times than you're going to succeed.
I am so stubborn about it. So many people are like, well, what would you do? And I'm like, nope. Nope. Switzerland.
Yeah.
I will get you an estimate,
right,
and you can decide.
Right.
I will give you all of your options, because sometimes it does come down to like when they see the numbers, that does seem to click for a lot of people. Yeah. Some people go into it and they have kind of a gut feeling of what they'd like to do, and they just want to get that last bit of data that they feel comfortable in making. It's the coin flip. The monetary estimate is the coin flip for a lot of caregivers. And so that's usually my like trump card that I pull out at the end, is like, you are having trouble making this decision. I will get you an estimate. That will give you time to think about it. And then hopefully by the time we get there, we'll have a treatment plan for the patient. So
before we jump to you, Bree, I'm not actually really sure what your experience level is in consultation, because you're still pretty new to it.
About that.
But like, what kind of in communication or helping people get through that process, what experience do you have, and kind of what are your deciding factors in like how to communicate with people?
Yeah, I think not so much in schools per se, but I've been working in the veterinary field as like a veterinary assistant, and when I first started in the UP, there's not really like technicians, because there's just not staff, so I acted as a technician. And in doing that gave me a lot of experience working with caregivers about going through estimates and deciding what do you want to do here. So a lot of like things that I found along the way, even up until my last job that I just ended up leaving, is when you go to talk to caregivers about what are your options and where do you want to go, is just straight asking them, what are your goals today? Because when you get that 18-year-old cat that is vomiting for 5 weeks, like is diarrhea, it's got all these things you could go into, but if their goal is to just give fluids and then see how it goes, and there's no reason to dive into all these things, because they don't want that and they don't want that. So that's what I talk to like them about, is like, what are your goals today for your patient? We had this cat at my last clinic that came in every like 3 weeks, and it was an 18-year-old, no, I think it was like 20-year-old cat that was balancing. It had like retinal hemiplegia, like it was like its whole eye was bleeding out constantly, but they were not ready for euthanasia. That talk, they just wanted to keep giving fluids and see how it goes. So whether we talked about like, how are things going? Do you want to do some tests? Do you want to look into this? Like, where are we at? Like, what's next session? They were like, nope, I only want sub-Q fluids, and that's like all we want to do. So that's all we did. So a lot of like what my experience had been is just talking through estimates with people, because when you bring out that estimate, that's $5 to $10 grand.
Yeah.
And the 10, like even the $5 grand is not possible for them, then like that's just a whole different conversation, and there's no reason to go into that. Here's what 10 grand looks like when they're like, I could never even do the $5 grand. So instead we have to talk about quality of life and go into the decision of euthanasia. And then I have to give that to the doctor and be like, this is what my gut is telling me about these people, and this is what I feel about these. You can absolutely talk to the caregivers and see what's happening, but they have told me specifically that these are the goals for today. And that's going to set the tone for the whole entire conversation. So that's kind of been my experience with that, is just going over estimates and things, because that's where most of my experiences have been, because vet school hasn't given, like, I haven't got to the clinical side yet, so I haven't got to talking to, like, that aspect with all the medicine. Just mainly going over estimates, what each thing means, if they're super interested in knowing, because when I give estimates, I talk to them, do you want to know, like, what are all these things individually, or I can sump them, like chunk them, tell you what they mean, what they're going to do for you and your patient, and then move forward. So you know that way. But if they want to know what's this exact chemistry panel going to include, I'm happy to tell them that. I might have to go ask somebody, but I am happy to tell them that. It's just a matter of like, what are their goals, and just asking them.
That's kind of, if I understand it, I mean, you've done that in the past, or maybe you still do. I don't really know.
It actually goes both ways. I have a diagram around somewhere, which I'll show you next time we're on together. But the whole idea is you need to get us to a certain level of trust in order to establish reality. So that's one of the big things, and we talk about the accountability ladder and all that other kind of stuff. But the way that I kind of merge that into practice is exactly that. So people are going to build trust different ways. So for us, it's, most of the people we see, we've never seen before. So in a short period of time, how do you build trust? So like in those consultations, I'll be like, hey, I know we're a 24-hour clinic, but just because we're 24 hours, we don't play that human game where everything's going to be 10 times more expensive. And they're like, oh, really? And, and even now the area veterinarians are like, you guys need to go down to PAW. They're like, well, I don't go to the emergency. They're like, no, actually they're cheaper than we are. So that's one of the ways in which you build trust. Another one is sometimes you build trust through knowing that you're not gouging people, build trust through your knowledge base. Like, oh, well, I might have to go ask someone, but yeah, I can talk to you about what these things are. And that's where, like I said, I think I'm kind of coming now on the other side where I've had enough of those consultations over the years, where I've actually become a little less specific, like even now when I go over, like, let's say blood work and liver enzymes are off, I'll say, well, we have 5 different markers. Of those 5 markers, 3 are abnormal, and they're about 6 to 8 times normal. This isn't great. I don't tell them what AST is. I don't tell them what total bilirubin is, unless for some reason, like they ask, and and a lot of times I'll just say, well, the important thing here, and they'll say, what is the number exactly? I'm like, well, we need to watch out on how we have this conversation, because if I tell you that your feline patient's ALT is 465, then you're going to be worried if it's 468. I said, so we need to, understand and respect. And that's when I bring diagnostic medicine and clinical medicine back into it. I'm like, we need to respect what the values are showing us, but we need the trend of what those numbers are doing with respect to clinical symptoms and response to therapy and, those types of things. So again, I've become quicker because I've really just sort of been like, all right, these caregivers most of the time have practically no understanding of anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology, any of this stuff. They just need to know, is everything going to be okay? So that's why, Caroline, when we talk about x-rays, it's like good or bad.
Yeah.
How are the x-rays? Are they bad? They're bad. Why? Because that doesn't look great. Cool. That's all you need.
Yeah.
Don't tell a radiologist.
Right.
But again, so that's a part of it, is I just find ways to kind of build trust. And from that, once you build that trust, you're going to be able to establish reality. And typically what ends up happening is if I feel like I can't get a caregiver to actual reality, then I understand that there's usually a barrier. Sometimes that barrier is denial. Sometimes that barrier is trust. Who are you? I don't know who you are. I want a second opinion. I got to take it to my vet because that's someone that I trust. Cool. Then we're probably not actually going to get any further here on consultation.
Yep.
I'm out. Yep. What do you want? And that's kind of the same thing. What would you like us to do?
Right.
Yep. And I do now a little bit more in clinical practice. I will focus a bit more on that patient servitude aspect.
Yeah.
So if I have one of those, extremely geriatric cats, very little quality of life, I say, listen, part of my job is to give your patient a voice in this conversation. So I'm going to have to tell you the hard things and pull the Band-Aid on some of these things so you understand how your cat or your dog is in this conversation. So I'm more of a vehicle to you understanding where they're at. And, and then it's just those things. People hear suffering, quality of life, pain. Everyone uses their own word. And they're like, oh, well, I knew he was suffering, but I didn't realize he was in pain. And it's like, well, in my brain, I would have assumed those two things were the same thing, but they're not for most people.
Always,
yeah. So that's where, that's how you kind of navigate those conversations on all of it, from like financial to, treatment plan, diagnostic result, on all of it. Is I still try to dial it back to being like, okay, cool. Diagnostic medicine, clinical medicine, most human caregivers coming in are going to be on the side of, I don't know if there's any other kind of caregivers. Doesn't matter. Caregivers coming in, almost all of them are going to be focused on clinical medicine. And then at the time of discharge, they'll be like, well, what do I look for? And I'm like, well, you've known your dog for the last 10 years, and you know that what brought you in my door is that your dog isn't what it's been for the last 10 years. So all you need to know is, does it get back to the way that it was? Is it still the same as it is right now, or does it get worse? And they're like, well, how do I know what worse is? I said, well, you knew it was worse, and that's what got you here, so it's not better than now. And
Trust
they're
your
like,
gut.
yeah, trust your gut. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. I was like, yes, so yeah, that's actually how I've kind of tightened up a lot of those consults, is rather than being like, well, you have to check for pale gums, and what's their heart rate, and what's their resting respiratory, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, if you have a back dog, you should probably tell them when it's paralyzed, they need to come in. However, if it's better, you're good. If it's worse, come back. And they're like, that makes sense. I'm like, I know. So it's clinical stuff. So I've actually driven more of my consults towards gut and empowering people to understand that they don't need to be doctors. They don't need to be scientists. They don't need to have the numbers. They don't need to have, and actually I tell them that, that's what you pay me for, because then I know those things and I'm going to help guide you as you go through your decision-making process.
Yeah, that's such a big thing. Is like you may not know you have all the necessary information, but you actually have more than you realize.
Yes.
Even though it's all just internal and you can't put words to it. Like a lot of it too is like, if you feel yourself feeling bad for your patient, like, well, you're probably reading something. It's probably worth investigating. So at this point, it has been about an hour and a half. It's been a very quick one.
LifeCast,
but before we go too crazy far, we still have Bree here. Do you have any other questions kind of revolving around Trust Your Gut? Anything that's on your mind?
Gosh,
To put you completely on the spot.
I was just 100%
in the
conversation.
That's fine. It's okay if you don't.
I mean, I guess I don't have any specific ones that I can think of right off the bat. It's just me kind of like when we were kind of talking, how you're doing, when Carla was talking, kind of like self-reflecting a little bit. I am still listening, but kind of self-reflecting on what connects in my own life. Is that when I talk to Boo about, I can feel it slipping away, how to get back and everything. Just in the future, and as this, like, I just ended the worst year of veterinary school in the history of veterinary school, and all online, it was a triumph for sure. So I'm like trying to get back to where I was in first year, because we talk about how like, oh, vet school sucks, it's awful, it's like it's gonna drag you across the floor. But like in my first year, I was like, am I going to the same vet school that everyone else? And I was like, are we sure about this? I don't know. It was okay. But then second year hit and you're like, oh, this is what everyone's talking about. There it is. So I'm just trying to get back into that point and just kind of find like how I can see future me in 10 years and 5 years, but how I'm really going to get there. And then if I find the right places I need to be at, how am I going to get there kind of thing. But also knowing that it's going to be fine. It'll work out. And I'm just kind of going through that. I don't have any specific
Perfect. That's not a problem.
I just really love having the conversations and talking about these things, because that's what it brings out. You think about it, you self-reflect, and you're like, I never thought about that, but now I have, and now I feel better about life.
I like it. Well, technically it is Tuesday, which means technically it is Tuesdays with Caroline.
Yes.
And I remember about a year ago, we did ask Caroline over the phone to take us out of the podcast, and she said yes. So if she would want to do the outro, she's more than welcome to do so.
It's really easy.
All the words vacate my brain immediately when you ask me to say that. All right, fine.
You got it. There's a camera right there.
So thank you for joining us for another Tuesdays with Caroline and Bree as well, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right.